Although it's an attractive idea from a certain point of view, you know, it'd be very nice and liberal to sort of say, you know, we don't really mind if people have these odd ideas, because, well, you know, let's all be as free thinking as we want. The problem with this sort of free thinking is that it tends to end up not being very free, in fact. So I've no doubt this may cause a bit of discussion later on, but well, that was the intention, so there we are. Well, I think I'll sort of draw to a close, because the main point of this talk was not to ramble on for ages, but it was to simply start the ball rolling. And I'll start off with, I think, a couple of quotes. An Open University professor, whose name escapes me for the moment, in a talk which I think was about more than religion, although it dealt with it, and religion in history, made the statement that the religion of modern Britain is a deistic, moralistic religion in general. Now, I think he had a point there, and despite the rise of various cults and sort of religious fashions, I think most people in Britain today, and probably in quite a lot of other Western countries, and it's different in other parts of the world, have a vague feeling that there must be something somewhere, and you know, you need something like that to keep you on the straight and narrow. Well, I think neither of those beliefs is true, but it does point up the kind of difficulty that you're often in when you're arguing with people about this, because you can never pin them down to very much that you can actually have a proper go at. So this does rather suggest that our arguments have to be just as subtle. Dorothy L. Sayers, who was one of the Christian apologists who actually appears to have had a functioning brain, she did, after all, write those rather amusing stories about Lord Peter Wimsey. She also wrote a cycle of plays called The Man Born to be King, and despite the fact that I'm now on the other side of this debate, that had a great effect on me when I was a little boy, I have to say. In fact, so much so that I have the braille of them still to this day. One of the things she said in her introduction was, "There have been suffering gods aplenty, and slain and resurrected gods not a few, but this, i.e. Jesus, is the only one with a date in history." Well, she may not be entirely right there, and of course there have been questions raised about the historical authenticity of Jesus of Nazareth, although I've, generally speaking, not been one who felt the need to take that extreme position. But anyway, that is one of the Christian claims, and that's another thing, of course, which makes the whole kind of ultra-symbolical position of some Christians rather untenable, because they have been claiming that at a certain point in history this guy walked the earth. Well, to sum up in general, it seems to me there are no distinctive truths of religion. Religion isn't a permanent or inevitable feature of human life. Religion does arise partly as a genuine attempt by people to explain the world they live in and answer questions that bother or concern them. You know, primitive men began to ask about their shadows and what happened to them in dreams, and had to accustom themselves to the difference between deep sleep, death, coma, dream, etc. But it's an attempt largely based on and fueled by ignorance of the world around them and misunderstanding. And as these areas of ignorance and misunderstanding decrease, and there will always be things for us to find out, of course, but as they decrease, it becomes more and more untenable to take a religious approach to things. The subject matter of religion, as I've said already, is too serious for it to be considered as merely a private question. And if human beings are to progress, they surely need to mature out of this religious mentality to take what charge they can of their own situation in society and in nature, we may only be in a position to fully appreciate the good things in life and the good that is in life if we face up to all its realities, the good or the bad, the hard or the soft. Thanks. Right, thank you very much to Sandy. Any comments, questions?
Well, we're dealing with spiritual matters then.
Do you think you get some very highly educated people who must be aware of the ramifications of science and subjects like that, bearing upon the existence of, if you like, gods or whatever you want to call them? It surprises me at times that they can sort of departmentalise in their mind something which they know is questionable, yet still carry on practicing and propagating it. What do you think possibly? I mean, so I've got one in mind, a man named Abdus Salam. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. He's a Pakistani, won the Nobel Prize. But he told me that, you know, though he knew that the ideas that he'd been taught in the Muslim faith about the gods were quite wrong, nevertheless, he still hung on to that faith. Also, despite the fact that he eventually was thrown out of it, did go back to Pakistan, because they didn't like his views either.
Well, Salman Rushdie had something the same dilemma, I think. He claimed in some of the interviews that he gave about the satanic verses that he had been raising issues in the faith, you know, that were of concern to the faith. But anyway, this question of people believing in apparently inconsistent things, I mean, I suppose this is just one of these things you get used to in life, in some ways. Russell Stannard, I think his name is another one, particle physicist who is a believing Christian. Now, I suppose some of those people would say, of course, that some of what you find out in particle physics is pretty odd, you know. The theory of relativity and quantum mechanics are both very odd theories. In fact, I don't wish to, you know, oblige anybody else although if somebody wants to have an argument with me later, I have to admit that I find it impossible to accept, as I've ever heard them stated, either of those two theories. Not that I'm saying there's nothing in them, far from it, in fact. You know, these theories are the result of scientific analysis and investigation, and at least they have that to distinguish them from the theories, if that's what we want to call them, of religion. The particle physicists and the various pioneers of modern physics were astounded by some of what they felt they had to accept. You know, so they knew just how odd their theories were as well. But I think that some particle physicists would cite that very oddity, that illogicality, even if you like, as a reason for, or as a justification for also maintaining a religious faith. But it's interesting the way you put it about Abdus Salam, that he knew perfectly well that his beliefs, his traditional beliefs were incompatible with what he'd found out in science, but nevertheless hung on to it. Well, I suppose it's an emotional thing, really. You know, I've crossed over, as it were, from one side of this spectrum to the other. I don't say it makes me uniquely qualified to give this talk, but I think it means I've got a particular perspective on it, which not all